What's cracking, y'all? You are now watching Boo TV. Appreciate you for stopping in. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, stay notified, and let's get into the topic for today. Came across this interesting topic from the YouTube channel Rebound Rewind. Which is more difficult, reaching 40,000 points as an NBA player or achieving 10 scoring titles as an NBA player? And you see what they got going here, right? 40K plus LeBron James, 10 scoring titles plus Michael Jeffrey Jordan. And I thought about it and I was like, oh, this is actually very interesting and maybe not very easy to tackle. But I thought about it for a bit. But one thing I wanted to look at is, okay, we know LeBron James is the 140K and we know Michael Jordan is the one guy that has 10 scoring titles. But after these guys, who got close? How many players got close and how close were they? And then where does it drop off from there, right? So doing my research, didn't take much research. So taking a look here at the 40,000 points. Obviously, we know LeBron James sits at number one with over 40,400 points. Next would be Kareem Abdul-Jabbar with about 38,300. Karl Malone about 36,900. Both of those players within 5,000. Then Kobe Bryant comes from within about 6,000 with 33,600, and Michael Jordan 32,200. Dirk Nowitzki 31,005, and Wilt Chamberlain 31,004. Right, that's 7 players within 10,000 points of LeBron James's 40,000. 2 players within 5,000. That's 7 players within at least 30% of 40,000. And you have another player in Kevin Durant who's just outside of that bubble that'll probably crack it, considering he's still playing and still scoring at a high level. Now, I was curious how many players scored at least 50% of 40,000, just to get an idea. This list only shows up to the top 50. And of the top 50, all of them get within 50% of 40,000 points. Now, switching over to scoring titles. Like I said, we know Michael Jordan has at least 10. Well, he actually has 7. Right? The next highest is Wilt Chamberlain with 7. Then Kevin Durant with 5. George Gervin with 4. Kobe Bryant with 4. James Harden with 4. And then other players with multiple scoring titles. George Mikan, Neil Johnston, Kareem, Bob McAdoo, Shaq have 3. And there are other players that have at least 2 as well. But once we get down to those numbers, they're pretty much insignificant. The big thing to look at here is that we only have 2 players in the history of the league, in Wilt Chamberlain and Kevin Durant, who have came within 50% of 10 scoring titles. 2 players within 50%, as opposed to at least 50 for 40K. I kind of wanted to test it against the field to see realistically what data we have supporting both sides. Now, the thing is, on the journey to 40K, you're not battling anybody else, right? For the most part, everything is under your control. As opposed to getting the scoring titles, all it takes is one other person outscoring you for that season and you lose the title. Therefore, there are very significant factors that are out of your control. You can't control how many points this other person is scoring any given season. That's just one person. At any given time during the league, you're going to have a handful of prolific scorers you're up against that you cannot control. Now, with both sides, you are fighting father time and you are fighting age, right? From the scoring title perspective, once you get out of your prime and as you get older, you're going to go on a decline, right? And you're going to have a bunch of other young players with all that energy, all that youthfulness, all spry, all crisp, going to get their buckets. So you got to get what you can just outside of your prime, into your prime, and just outside of your prime. However long that person's prime is. The average lifespan for the career of an NBA player is about 5 years, believe it or not, just under 5 years. But typically when you're talking about someone getting that many scoring titles or reaching that amount of points, they're on a different tier, right? They operate on a different set of rules. These are people with generally, 12 years plus playing at a high level. And like I said, when you're talking about 40K, because you're battling age, you're also battling attrition and you're battling injuries. And these are typically the things that will prevent a player from reaching that 40K plateau. Obviously, as you move out of your prime, for most players, you're not as good as you were in your prime. Though, because how the game is played now, you're seeing more and more players being able to put up points even at an advanced age, where back in the day where the game was played differently, that wasn't very commonplace. Kobe Bryant, I actually was going to be the first person to nab 40K, I thought. But you saw what happened to Kobe. He was well on pace for it. But age, attrition, injury, Achilles tendon snap, broken knee, broken shoulder, that was a wrap. But he was well on pace because he was still putting up all-star scoring numbers, at an advanced age in his career. And it didn't look like he was going to slow down, but his body failed him. Another player that was well on pace, obviously, Michael Jordan. But his circumstance wasn't injuries per se, because you might look at the Wizards years and be like, well, yeah, he messed his knee up and he wasn't quite the same, with the Wizards after he messed his knee. But you got to go back before that. Michael Jordan left the game on his first retirement for, you might as well say, 2 years. Those are a lot of points left on the table. And you could talk about the second retirement because he was still scoring at an all-star level in 1998. So I think largely when you're talking 40K, I think it's largely going to be, do you want to play that long? Is the hunger there? The determination? And is your body going to hold up? You don't really see players retiring and coming back in their prime, really ever in the NBA, ever. Very special circumstances will kind of force a player to do that. And LeBron James is the one guy that we've seen just be extremely healthy for over 20 years. Really no broken bones, no season-ending surgeries, no, significant tears of any type. He's had nothing like that. Some scrapes, some bruises, some rolled ankles, some sprains. That's about it. So he has been extremely fortunate and extremely lucky to go this far without anything catastrophic happening. And it took all that and all his longevity to hit 40K. What I found amazing about Kobe Bryant is he was the opposite. Kobe Bryant was injured pretty significantly, but he played through all his injuries. You're not going to find players that are going to play through as many injuries as Kobe Bryant did. It's quite impressive what Kobe was able to achieve given his circumstances. But you're on this journey low. If you get a good bit of health and you can still score, which in today's NBA, like I said, it's easier to score. So you're going to have more players that are going to be challenging that than we have seen in the past. But on the other hand, those 10 scoring titles, I'm going to have to say that the 10 scoring titles is harder just for the fact that it's you against the field. You're also going to have to deal with age and attrition to be able to still get those scoring titles, especially deeper in your career. But then it's you against the field. And the field is vast, especially in today's NBA, again, because there's so many players that are going to be scoring 27, 28, 30 points per game plus. There's a whole lot of scorers out here because of how the game is played. So especially now in this era, as we move forward, I think getting 10 scoring titles is more difficult. You just can't control certain variables on that quest. You really can't. Let's just say a player plays 15 years. So you're going to get the scoring title 10 of those 15 years. Only 5 years somebody from the field was able to topple you. That is very, 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 very improbable, in my opinion. You got to be a scoring demon to do that. And circumstances have to go your way. You know, now you got these teams or these players coming together, multiple prolific scorers. Now you got to share the rock. Now you're not scoring quite as much as opposed to that one guy who's the lone all-star, or maybe just has the second one and he can assume most of the scoring. You see what I mean? There's a whole lot of things that happen throughout a player's career and a player profile that can dynamically change that. Yep, I'm going scoring titles, but I'm sure there's a lot of other things I haven't considered, but that's why we watched the video. Let's get into it. Also, I posed this question. This is another way I'm thinking about it. What do you think you will see next? Another player scoring at least 40K or another player getting at least 10 scoring titles? I think we'll see someone nab 40K before we see someone get 10 scoring titles. I'm just saying. And if there's going to be another player to do it, I think Luka Doncic could be on his way if he could stay healthy. He doesn't have that body LeBron has, but we'll see.
Which is harder to achieve, 10 scoring titles or 40,000 total points? In order to score 40,000 points, you need to average 24 points per game or 2,000 points per season for 20 seasons. Only 6 players have ever played 20 seasons or more in the NBA, let alone scored 24 points per game in each of them. The average points per game for NBA scoring titles since 1980 or since the three-point line was introduced is an average of 31.16 points per game. So to win 10 scoring titles, you need to average 31 points per game for at least 10 seasons in your career. With these parameters, only 2 players since the three-point era got close, Michael Jordan and Allen Iverson. AI only has 3 seasons with over 31 points per game. LeBron only has 1 scoring title when he averaged 30 points per game in 2008. From a pure probability perspective, both feats are equally as rare as only 1 player achieved each feat. Now, if we widen the parameters to allow players who got close, more players did get close to 40,000 points than they did to 10 scoring titles. Kareem is 5% behind the 40K feat, Karl Malone is 9% behind, Kobe is 17% behind, and Jordan himself is 20% behind. On the flip side, Wilt is in second place with 7 scoring titles, which is 30% away from Jordan's 10. Kevin Durant and George Gervin each have 4, which is 60% away. LeBron only has 1, which is 90% away from Jordan's 10. From a purely mathematical perspective, it is more likely you get closer to 40,000 points than you do 10 scoring titles. Intangibly, you could argue otherwise, but the numbers favor the scoring titles. However, I don't think that this is a fair place to end this video. There is more to this world than purely mathematical hypotheticals. Let's do an intangible hypothetical. To elaborate, if LeBron and Jordan switched places, or if both restarted their careers with the knowledge of being on a mission to achieve each other's scoring feats, I think both players possess the ability to get the job done. If Jordan wanted 40,000 points and that was his only goal and he did not care about winning, he would most likely decide to not retire mid-season twice, which would open up 4 possible NBA seasons. In Jordan's lowest scoring season, his final season retiring at age 40, he still averaged 20 points per game. Jordan currently has 32,292 points. He is just 7,708 points away. He only needs to average 23.5 points per game in these 4 missing seasons to get to that 40K. By the way, he played all 82 games on 37 minutes per game in his final season, so don't give me any longevity counters. Vice versa, LeBron only averaged 30 points per game just twice in his career. Once when he won the scoring title in 2008 at the age of 23, and another time decades later in 2022 at the age of 37. LeBron James has a career 7.4 assists. That's 14 points on the table. But I don't think it's realistic to drop that assist average all the way down to 0, even if he wanted to be a score-first forward. If that assist average dropped down to 4 per game instead of 7, thus increasing his career scoring average by 6, his 27 points per game would jump to 33 points per game. Averaging 33 points per game from 2003 to 2024 would give him 17 scoring titles, and averaging 33 points per game from 1985 to 2003 would give him 14 scoring titles, depending if you want to round up or down on the winners. Would LeBron actually have these averages if he wanted to? It's certainly possible, but it would go against his play style. He would probably lose more games than he should, but I don't think he would lose a ton of them because averaging 33 points per game is still extremely productive, but it would go against everything he's learned as a player. Which begs the question, is getting 40k points or 10 scoring titles just stat padding to begin with? Of course, that answer is a resounding no. Very rarely does a scoring champion miss the playoffs. Some rare instances include Steph Curry in 2021, Tracy McGrady in 2004, Russell Westbrook in 2015, and Pete Maravich in 1977, which means roughly 94% of NBA scoring champions play winning basketball. And even still, some of these playoff missing scoring champions still do have winning records. For example, Russell Westbrook went 45-37, but the West was just absolutely stacked back in 2015. On the flip side, every player in the top 10 all-time scoring list has either an MVP or a ring or both, aside for Carmelo Anthony. The point is though, you don't get 30,000 points by accident. Now I know there are instances in which some players knew that they were a few points away from either winning a scoring title or achieving a scoring record and focused on achieving it. For example, David Robinson in 1994. If you consider that stat padding, that is a slightly different story, but at some point one could argue that because Robinson won that final game, calling it stat padding is fruitless as a critique because stat padding should be a critique for those who achieve stats at the team's expense, not at the team's benefit. A more true example of stat padding would be like when Ricky Davis purposely tried to force a triple-double and the NBA did not allow him to get that rebound back in 2003. Back to the topic at hand. Ultimately, both feats are ridiculously hard. If you exclude Wilt's superhuman 7 scoring titles, Kevin Durant and George Gervin are the only ones with 4 of them. To ask them to go for 10 instead of 4, which means they would have to double their trophy count. And if you wanted 40,000 points, you would have to play 1,492 games and average 27 points per game in those games. What is harder? Mathematically, the scoring titles have a lower probability based on percentages, and intangibly speaking, while this one is a more disputed answer, you can form an argument that 40k is just physically more taxing and thus harder. But if push comes to shove, and if you want me to stop fence sitting and I had to only pick one, I would lean towards the 10 scoring titles being the more difficult achievement, as more players got closer to 40k than they did to 10 scoring titles. But let me know in the comments below, which do you think is harder to achieve and which is more impressive? Don't forget to dunk on that like button and subscribe with notifications turned on. I'm Rebound Rewind, and I'll fast forward to you.
Happy to see that he had much of the same logic that I had from both sides, and then brought up some interesting points. Now, he brought up the hypotheticals, and while I was talking in my head, I was thinking about the hypothetical argument, but I left it alone because it becomes way too nuanced once you hit that point. And I didn't even think about a situation where it's like, okay, but what if you told these people, I need you to gun for this? You're gunning for 40k, you're gunning for 10 scoring titles. Okay? That's not how the game is played for an entire career. That would just... well, you know what? I'm gonna leave that alone. That's a topic for another day. I'm not even touching that. I was gonna go into a certain player that's stat padding these days, but we're not even going into that. But yeah, typically it's not how the game is played, and even for the most prolific scorers, right? But even with that, for the 10 scoring titles, there's still a lot of other prolific scorers that you're going against. Just because you're gunning for it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to get it. Because there could be another player gunning for it too. But even if you have another player gunning for 40k, that's not going to stop you from achieving 40k. Anyway, that was fun. I like that. That was a cool little scenario to think about. Let me know what you think about it. Pop off in the comment section, sound off. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, stay notified. I'll catch you on the next one. We out, baby.